This week, retailers scramble to get ready as the Black Friday shopping frenzy looms. Also, we'll take a look at how a big financial services company and its new Reset and Grow positioning campaign. The head of Channel 4 News in Britain, Pear, weighs in on changing television audience trends and how Dublin's famous Molly Malone statue became an icon for breast cancer awareness. Well, welcome to you, and let's start with this. Traditional broadcasters are no longer just competing with each other for a share of audience, but also with digital content platforms such as YouTube. So with waning audience attention spans and dwindling advertising spend, how do the traditional broadcasters and news organizations in particular etch out their place in an oversaturated content space? Pear is head of Channel 4 News in the United Kingdom, and he may have some good ideas. Give me a sense of where Channel 4 News fits into the kind of news landscape or continuum in the UK.
So we are a public service broadcaster. That is that we are licensed to provide the news. We are regulated by Ofcom, which means that we have to be balanced and we have to be accurate, and we can be held to account if we fall on either of those standards. We are owned by the state, but we are commercially funded. So we have a greater degree of independence than the BBC does from the government. We have a very strong remit in that the programme has to be probing, investigative, and be very heavy on foreign news. It's an hour-long programme at 7 p.m, and we have an average audience of about 650,000, which is not huge for television news, but it's much bigger than the 24-hour news channels. It's about 10 times as much as them, but maybe half the amount of the BBC major bulletins, and we have 1 hour of bespoke news, which we take very, very seriously.
So against that backdrop then, let's talk about the newscast as we know it. In this age of social media, YouTube, video clips, what do people want these days from that set-piece news bulletin that they perhaps wanted years ago and are not getting now?
I still believe there is a definite role for a programme like Channel 4 News. So we are quite combative with our journalism. We do a lot of investigations and we like to hold people in power to account. So we have quite punchy interviews. We have quite serious, in-depth subjects, but we often take a slightly different angle to other broadcasters. We use a lot of independent journalists who pitch to us stories that could be stories you've heard of before, but they're done from a different angle.
So what determines a different approach or a different angle then?
So we're very aware that in this 24-hour media age, people are getting news on their phones, they're getting news on Twitter, on YouTube, as you said, or on 24-hour news stations. So when they come to us, we like to take pride in the best possible package report of the day. So the average package report can be 2.5 minutes, maybe on the BBC. Our packages will be 3.5 to maybe 4 or even 5 minutes, where we not only try and tell what the story is, but take a step back and give a greater degree of context and history, and perhaps try and helicopter above the story and tell the viewer why we may be in this certain period of history and what might happen going forward. So we give a lot of analysis as well as the news story itself. We will try and find a story that no one else has got, an investigation, or recently this year we did a lot of work on Cambridge Analytica, which is this big data company with Facebook. We revealed that there was a lot of malfeasance in the centre of the company. We went undercover in that company and we led on that for about a week or 2 weeks, and then we were followed by the rest of broadcast. So we like to think that the viewer wants more, and then we will give them a greater level of understanding. Even if they think they know what's going on in the news, we tell them something that perhaps other people haven't told them.
And I would come back at you and say, do people really want that these days? In an age, in a media age where time has become a commodity, is the traditional newscast, the hour bulletin that you're putting together, however good it is and however analytical it is, it's no longer appointment viewing, surely?
I would argue with that because this year we've seen a slight decline in our audiences. I personally believe that's because of Brexit. People are annoyed by the story. The story is incredibly frustrating and quite boring. It involves the same characters night after night, not being able to come up with an agreement with the European Union. So I think the viewers have been put off because of that. But over the last 4 years, we've grown our audience gradually 3% a year. And if you look at newspaper declines, which are declining maybe 10 or 15% per annum, our story has been for the last 4 years of people coming to us in uncertain times and wanting to know what's going on. And we find that the more serious the news story, the bigger the audience we get. But we are consistently getting 650,000 people, which is pretty much bigger than any national newspaper.
Fair point, but is it the right audience? Because these days you've got to be reaching the decision makers, the young decision makers, the millennials, the influencers, whatever you want to call them. Our television news audience is not simply getting older.
Our audience is very interesting. It skews quite old, between above the age of 50 and especially above 60, who are sort of news obsessives. We also skew quite big with the younger generation. Those are from the age of, I think it's 16 to 32. Now that has declined, but what we've done is we've gone to them where they're watching news. So we've gone to Facebook in the first instance, and we're a very small news organisation. There's only 100 people working at Channel 4 News compared to 8,000 people working at the BBC. But we hired some very brilliant young journalists who said we need to re-edit everything that we're putting on the programme in a different way and put it on Facebook. We started doing this 3 years ago. We got huge audiences. I mean, in 2016 we got an audience of 2 billion views on Facebook. On 2017 the same. Obviously, our relationship with Facebook's become slightly fraughter because we did an investigation which revealed...
You don't say, yes. Okay.
Which revealed stuff about them they didn't want revealed.
And you've also called for Facebook to be regulated.
Yes, and it wiped 100 billion off their share price. So
how did that feel?
It felt... it felt great because people were mystified as to how elections were being run. The story was really about how Facebook and other platforms were sharing data with companies like Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica were taking this data and they were psychologically profiling individual voters, and then individual voters were being sent tailored messages from candidates. And I think that's what's happening all over the world.
But back to the original point that you were making, news these days to reach a different audience has got to be repurposed to the needs or to the social habits that they have.
And that's what we've done. At the end of 2016, there was the siege of Aleppo, and we had an incredible journalist there, a woman called Wad Al-Khatib, who was filming inside the hospital where she was taking sanctuary with her husband, who was a doctor. She filmed some of the most unbelievable footage of the Syrian war. And we were putting out on the programme in maybe 7 or 8 minute pieces that were very, very emotional and hard-hitting. But we were repurposing them on Facebook for 2 or 3 minutes, and these were being viewed by hundreds of millions of people. And I do think they gave a greater awareness of the war to a younger group. I think sometimes we can think, well, younger people don't care about the news. They really do. They care more than older people. It's just, you've got to try and grab their attention. I do think there is an attention deficit because people watch shorter stuff, but you can grab their attention. And in the last, sorry, just make one last point. In the last year, we've moved our focus from Facebook to YouTube, which is a slightly longer and more in-depth viewing. And we're finding that the longer the pieces we put on there, the longer the average viewing time is.
There is an attention deficit. I'll certainly agree with you in that respect. I'd also suggest to you that there's a trust deficit these days as far as the mainstream media is concerned. We have this phrase, fake news, that is bandied about all the time. Do people still trust us? 2
years ago, fake news was at its height. I think certain state actors, and obviously I'm talking about Russia, and other people and organizations who realized they could make a buck out of ripping off people's content, repurposing it, giving it a fake agenda, and a lie traveled very, very far and wide, very, very quickly with the internet. What will ultimately happen is the platforms who have been refusing to accept that they are publishers, i.e. that they are not responsible for their content. I think it's happened in Germany. They can be fined now for spreading lies. And I think it's happened to a certain extent with GDPR, the new data rules in Europe. I think that we're going to see legislation across the world which is going to hold these platforms to account, so that the sort of fake news material that you've seen, it finds it harder to spread.
Let me move from fake news to security as far as journalism is concerned. You'll be well aware of the recent evacuation of CNN headquarters in New York and the pipe bomb that was sent. I think earlier this year you had to call in security specialists following an interview between one of your presenters and I'm reading this, a Canadian psychologist who'd attracted a following among the alt-right. How big is the security threat against the media right now? How worried should we be?
I think the media's always been under threat.
More so now, do you think?
Yes, I think certainly when you're covering wars, before journalists were always seen as neutral. Now I think they're targets for either assassination or kidnapping, and that's changed the way in which we cover wars. We use a lot more material that we get from social media than actually filming it ourselves, and I'm sort of uneasy about that sometimes. But as for personal security, I think this goes down to the platforms again. I mean, Twitter, having been a wonderful sort of tool for news, has become just a platform for anger and for threats. And you were talking about Kathy Newman, who's one of our presenters. She did a bombastic, assertive interview with the Canadian gentleman.
As she must.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people had lots of differing points of view, which is fine. I don't mind people expressing whether they thought the interview was strong or weak, but they were making death threats. They were making sexual comments about her, and they were attacking her as a woman. And I do find that the women reporters on my programme are far more targeted with unbelievably violent and abusive language by people on platforms such as Twitter. And I cannot believe that this has been going on for 2 or 3 years without Twitter really working out how to combat this. And I know that they're taking people off quicker than they used to, and I know that they think they're on it. But the amount of money that the platforms are making compared to the amount of money they're spending on trying to regulate them so that they're not centres for hate and fake news is still massively out of kilter.
Editor Channel 4 News, Pear, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next on Mags on Media, brands and retailers scrambling to get ready as the biggest shopping day of the year looms.
Marketing is getting naked, and you're invited.